Hey everyone, welcome to my mid-June wrap-up. If you haven't seen my early June wrap-up, I had mentioned that I've been reading quite a bit in June, so I'm splitting the wrap-up into 3 separate videos. The first one was covering the first 10 days of June, and now I'm covering from June 11th to the 20th. So the next wrap-up will be from June 21st to 30th. And these past 10 days, I have read 8 more books, so I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about each of them. So the first book I finished is Beyond the Tides by Liz Johnson, and this was for my Christian book club. And in this book, we have a woman named Meg, and her father has been running this lobster business, this lobster fishing business for years, but his wife, Meg's mother, has recently become ill with an illness that they don't know quite what it is. It seems to be something cognitive, and they're, trying to figure out what it is. They're going to specialists, and that's just a whole other side plot. But Meg's father can't take care of this business anymore because he has to care for his wife on a day-to-day basis. And so he decides to sell the business, and he wants to sell it to a man named Oliver. And Meg and Oliver have a little bit of history. Oliver did something when they were in high school that has just made Meg very bitter towards him. So when her father offers Oliver his lobster fishing business, Meg is furious, and she decides to, prove to her father that she should be the one to run the business. Ironically, she gets very seasick. She's not the biggest boat person. She doesn't go fishing, none of that, but she really, really wants to take over the business just because Oliver was offered it, basically. Oliver, on the other hand, sees this fishing business as a huge opportunity and wants to take it. So they start off really, really butting heads because they both want this business. And so Meg's father decides to kind of set up like a trial, and Meg and Oliver end up working together, and then Meg's father will decide at the end who should keep the business. So I overall enjoyed the book. I ended up giving it 3 stars, which whenever I read a contemporary romance, a 3-star is usually my rating. I don't know what it is about contemporaries. I've just never really been drawn to them, and there needs to be much more than just a romance plot. And in this book, it was definitely an enemies to lovers romance. Like, that was the main plot line. And enemies to lovers is one of my favorite tropes, so I was hoping that I would love it more. There were just some things in this book that bothered me, and it's because it's marketed as Christian fiction. And so when I read a Christian fiction, I kind of have certain expectations, and with this book, certain boundaries were crossed for me. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Meg and Oliver and their relationship, and I may touch on some minor spoilers, but they won't be anything major, like any major spoiler that would ruin the story. So because Meg and Oliver are following this like enemies to lovers trope, you know where the story's gonna go. Like, you know how it's gonna end. There were times where it was just really, really cheesy, and I felt a little bit uncomfortable with certain choices that Meg and Oliver make, and they're those choices that cross like a boundary for me. So minor spoilers. There's one scene where Meg is extremely sore from all the stuff that they've been doing on the boats, and she goes to Oliver's house. There's no one in the house, so already, that's a slippery slope. And this is coming from like a Christian perspective. If I was reading a secular book, whatever, like that, it's different. But Meg was sore. Oliver had this like magic numbing cream to like numb her muscle pain, and he's just like sitting there rubbing her back, having these thoughts. And that scene, every time I think about it, it just cracks me up because it was so funny. But also it definitely crossed a line, but it was really funny. Another minor spoiler, Meg and Oliver end up spending the night together on a boat because someone has been trying to like hijack their work and the boat and everything. And they end up both sleeping on the boat to make sure that no one comes and tries to do anything throughout the night. And for me personally, like it does cross a line. And again, like this is just coming from the fact that this is a Christian novel. A side plot line to this book though, like I mentioned earlier, is Meg's mother's health, and she has this like mystery condition. And so she's seeing these specialists and they're not figuring out what's wrong with her. And I was just so invested in that storyline. And Oliver also has a brother that his family has been estranged from, and they hear some news about him. And I think that is going to be the main plot line for the second book in the duology, which that's the only reason I have any interest in reading the second book. But yeah, overall, I gave it 3 stars. I actually had a decent amount of fun reading this book. The setting, Prince Edward Island, I loved it. Yeah, 3 stars, not too bad. I then read Wolf Children, which is a manga, and I don't read manga very often. It's not something that I gravitate towards, but I was just looking for something really quick. And then when I went to pick it up from the library, it was like this thick. There were some pages though that were just illustrations, so it was a fairly quick read. So the reason I decided to read it was because I had seen the trailer for the anime for Wolf Children, and I like to read the book before I watch the movie. That's just how I am. And so when I saw the trailer and it's just so cute, I just had to read the book first. And as expected, it was adorable. So this book is basically about a girl who is in university, and she sees this male student, and he seems very like, not sketchy, but just odd. Like there's something different about him. And she kind of follows him, and they strike up a conversation, and they eventually fall in love. And then she finds out that he is actually half human, half wolf. Very interesting premise, not something I would normally read. And so they fall in love, and they have 2 little kids who are also part wolf, part human. But something ends up happening to this like half wolf man, and the story is basically about the mom raising her kids and how difficult that would have been. I ended up really enjoying it. I gave it 4 stars. I think that it portrayed the difficulties of motherhood really well, and it's so heartwarming and sad and joyful at the same time. Like I just felt a variety of human emotions reading this. Again, not a story I would normally pick up. It was just one of those books that like I don't have many thoughts about it. I don't really have much to say other than it made me feel a lot and it was really cute. I enjoyed it. 4 stars, and it's definitely making me open to trying more manga, so we'll see. Then I finished reading this book that I started at the beginning of June, and I still have no idea what to say about it. It's one of those books where I read it and I felt so much and I had so many thoughts, but I've always struggled to put my thoughts and feelings into words and to like express what's going on inside of my head. And that book is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I have had this book for a while, and I had zero idea of what it was about. Like I knew nothing about it going into it. I was extremely nervous when I picked it up, but I did not realize how easy it is to read this book. Like the writing is very straightforward and to the point. So this book is interestingly narrated by a character named John Steinbeck, but he isn't a character in the story itself. I mean, he is, but it's like he's never really on the page. The book also spans a few decades from the late 19th century up until the middle of World War I. So we're introduced to 2 main families in this book. First, we have the Hamiltons, who are basically immigrants from Ireland who moved to the Salinas Valley in California to like start a new life, start farming. And then we're introduced to the Trask family who live in New England. So the Hamilton family definitely plays a very important role in the story itself. But as a whole, this story really centers on the Trask family. And so we start off with Adam and Charles Trask, and they definitely are meant to represent Cain and Abel from the Bible. So this whole book is basically not really an allegory, but it definitely really heavily draws from the biblical story of Cain and Abel. So Adam and Charles Trask are again, caricatures of Cain and Abel. And so there are just so many symbolic things in this story in terms of their relationship with each other and with people around them, and their outlook on work and making money and everything. Like there's just so much symbolism. Kind of get that feeling that their father loves Adam more, and Adam being that Abel figure, it's definitely symbolic there as well. The number of times I'm going to say symbol or symbolic in this video, I apologize in advance, but this whole book is just symbols upon symbols and symbolism and all that, so I'll try not to say it so much. And then later on in the book, Adam actually marries a woman named Kathy, and she is a complete sociopath. Like this woman, I'm just not even going to get into that, but he marries Kathy and she is the way she is. And they have twin sons as well that represent Cain and Abel. And so we get more of their story. But what I loved is those 2 boys, even though they both represented the good of humanity and the evil of humanity, like there's always that dichotomy, John Steinbeck infused a lot more hope in their story. And basically throughout this book, Steinbeck is saying that evil exists because good exists. They can't exist without each other. But at the end of the day, we have this thing called free will. and we have some level of power over the choices and the actions that we, you know, make. I feel like I'm explaining this so terribly. I'm so sorry. I am not an English major. I'm not the best at like discussing themes and things in books, but it did have a very big impact on me, and I'm so glad I read it. Beyond all the deep themes in the book, there is a lot of humor and just wit and really, really good dialogue. There's also a side character named Lee, and he is like the family servant. So he works for Adam and helps take care of Adam's sons. He was my favorite character in the book. He's hilarious. And he's that one character that really helped Adam and his sons in their struggles. But it was just in little ways. He was just that kind of character that really helps people grow, and he just had such a big heart, and I loved Lee so much. I do want to mention that there are trigger warnings, and I would definitely look them up for this book. There is some adult content. It definitely feels appropriate for this book and for the story that's being told. We do spend some time in a brothel, but it's not like overtly smutty by any means. It's just honest and brutal, and this book is very brutal in what it discusses. Steinbeck does not gloss over things. He just says it as it is, very straight, blunt, to the point. Like, he won't use words that insinuate things, he'll just outright say it. And I really like that he wasn't sugarcoating over anything and what it means to be a human and the good and the bad and all of that. So I feel like I've been talking about this for too long. But yeah, 4 stars, definitely surprised me. I was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. I then read Powder and Patch by Georgette Hare, and this book was just so silly. If you plan on reading this book, just expect silliness and drama, and you're not supposed to take it seriously at all. So in this book, we have a man in his early 20s named Philip Jetton, and he has fallen in love with a girl, Cleone, and they like grew up together as kids. They always played together, and he really, really has feelings for her, but he is what everyone calls a country bumpkin. So he doesn't really live up to like society's standards in terms of appearance and dress and everything. And this really bothers Cleone because she is so superficial and expects him to be this like dashing man with a powdered wig and the whole regalia. And he's like, not my kind of thing. I like to be dressed as comfortably as possible. I like working in the stables. I like being in the country. I like being outside. But Cleone is having none of it. She wants him to be this like dashing rake of a gentleman. And so Philip's like, okay, fine. I'll go to Paris. I'll powder up just to make Cleone happy. He comes back, and this girl wants the old Philip because she's superficial and doesn't know what she wants and is very immature. And so from there, the story really picks up, and oh my gosh, Cleone. One of the most insufferable characters I have ever read in a book. And I completely understand why so many people have given this book 1 star. I completely understand why. I personally really enjoyed it. Like, I was just rolling my eyes the entire time, but it was that kind of enjoyment where I was like both annoyed and amused, if that makes sense. Like, I had a great time. I really, really liked Philip. He is the one character that just kept me wanting to keep reading, but Cleone does not deserve him. Philip is too good for her, 100%. One thing that really took away from my enjoyment though was there is a lot of French. There's so much French dialogue when Philip is in Paris, and I'm just like, je ne sais pas, I mean, Google Translate can only do so much, so. Overall, I enjoyed it, and if you do like Georgette Hare, and if you like really silly Regency era romances, this is a fun read, and it's really short too. You can get through it really quick, but I would not say it's an amazing book by any means, but just silliness and fun. So after I read those books that I just talked about, I hit a really big reading slump, and it literally came out of nowhere. I was reading one night, and then the next morning, massive reading slump. But I had started Potiphar's Wife by Misu Andrews, and unfortunately, my reading slump really affected my enjoyment of this book. I adore Misu Andrews. I consider her to be a favorite Christian biblical fiction author of all time, like my absolute favorite. And this book was a 4 stars, so it's just lower on my rating scale of like all the Misu Andrews books. It's definitely one of the lower ones, but 4 stars, I still enjoyed it. It's following the biblical story of Joseph, but Joseph is not the main character in this book. We have Potiphar's wife, and in the Bible, Joseph was sold by his brothers as a slave to Egypt, and in Egypt, he is basically brought into this man named Potiphar, his household, to work as a slave, and he ends up rising in rank because Potiphar finds Joseph to be a man of integrity and very, very smart, And later on in Joseph's time in Potiphar's household, Potiphar's wife ends up trying to seduce Joseph. And what Misu did with this story is give Potiphar's wife a voice and give her a story. Because Potiphar's wife isn't named in the Bible and we don't really know anything about her, I think that Misu did a really good job with what we know from history, which is very, very little. So Potiphar's wife, her name is Zuleika, and I'm pretty sure the Quran names her as Zuleika. Misu does amazing research when she writes her books, and so I trust that she has, she's done her work for this one. And so in this book, Zuleika, she grew up on the island of Crete, and she ends up marrying Potiphar. Obviously, she ends up in Egypt. But she has experienced some very traumatic events in Crete, and she just lives her life in Egypt with this like feeling of abandonment and humiliation and hurt, and her mental health really suffers. And so we're really learning about what she could have been like as a person and what would have led up to her attempted seduction of Joseph. Again, a powerful book, 4 stars, and if you do like biblical fiction, I would highly recommend. Okay. Then I read Magpie Murders, and I forget the author's name, but I'll have the picture up. And this was a really, really unique murder mystery. I gave it 3.5 stars, and I know this may bother some people, but I dropped half a star just because there was some content that was completely unnecessary to the story. It served no purpose to the story. There's a little bit of language, and I know some people don't like that, so I just wanted to put that out there. But 3.5 stars. The mystery itself was a 4.5 to 5 star for me. Like, it was so good. And what I loved about this book is it's a story within a story, which I've never read anything like it before. At least I don't think, but it was just so uniquely told. And so we start off introduced to this woman named Susan, and she works for a publisher. She is an editor, so she obviously like reads books before they're published and edits them and whatever. She does her job. And so she gets this manuscript by a very well-known mystery writer named Alan Conway. And as she's reading this, we're also reading it. So it starts off with Susan, and then the whole story is basically, in the book. And so we're reading it as well. So Alan Conway is a very well-known mystery writer, and this is his latest installment in his Detective Atticus Punt series. And so Susan is in the modern day. She's reading this story. The murder mystery that she is reading is set in 1950 in a small English village. The best. I love that kind of setting. The village vibes and all the different characters and like their interactions definitely screamed Agatha Christie, and that's one reason I enjoyed it so much. I would not say the writing style is exactly like Agatha Christie. I think Agatha Christie is very unique, but the detective in this work of fiction named Atticus Punt, he is German, and just his intelligence and everything was reminiscent of Hercule Poirot. And so we're reading this mystery and we have a murder occur, and it's a very like Agatha Christie-esque mystery where you feel like anyone in the village could have done it. And then a second murder happens and it just adds another layer, and I'm just like, what's happening? But Susan, who is the editor reading this, starts to realize certain things about the story that just seem very odd, and they kind of jump out to her, and they seem to reveal certain things about the writer, Alan Conway. And then Alan Conway is also found dead. And it's just this whole mystery. There's so many layers to it. And overall, I really, really enjoyed it. I wasn't the biggest fan of Susan and like her perspective, but I absolutely loved the 1950 Atticus Punt mystery, the story within a story. It was just so good. So yeah, if you like a traditional murder mystery, a traditional whodunit, but with like a different flair to it, I would highly recommend this one. Then I read another whodunit style book, and I read The Bridge to Belle Island by Julie Klassen, and this is a Regency era, like Christian fiction mystery. And I ended up giving this also a 3.5 stars. I enjoyed my time reading it. I really enjoy the Regency era. Julie Klassen is a very, very good writer. I actually did guess the ending though. I was shocked because I was not expecting that. Like, I never guess the correct culprit. But yeah, I guessed the ending, and I was kind of like forming theories in my head as to why I think this person was the killer. And I was right about that too. Like, that was interesting. I've never been able to guess murderers before, but 3.5 stars means I enjoyed it. So in this book, we have our main perspective is actually a male character named Benjamin, and he just experienced something extremely embarrassing in court. He is like a lawyer in the making, and he's just this humiliated guy, and he really needs like a new job where he can just get away from London, get away from all of what just happened. And so Benjamin is working with this man named Mr. Hardy at this law firm, and Mr. Hardy's friend ends up murdered. And so Benjamin and Mr. Hardy go and, you know, see the crime scene, and they have a suspect, and it is this woman here on the cover, and her name is Isabel. She lives on this remote island on the River Thames, and the man that was murdered is actually Isabel's trustee, and so she is thought to be the primary suspect. And so Benjamin goes on this island and like befriends her, and she doesn't know that he's kind of, you know, investigating this man's death. Isabel has this really deep fear of leaving the island. She never leaves. She doesn't go to London. She stays on her island, and it's because there's this idea that any person in her family that has left the island has died young, and it's this superstition, and she's just very, very like afraid, basically. She just doesn't want to leave. And Isabel's experiencing what she believes to be like this reoccurring dream where she is in the room with her trustee that was murdered, but she has never left the island, so that's impossible. And she's like, is this a dream or a memory? Because I've never left the island. And I really enjoyed that aspect of the story. But then a second death occurs and things just go from there. And it's, like I said, a very good story, and I overall really enjoyed it. I always enjoy Julie Klassen's writing, and yeah, I'm excited to read more from her works. The last book I'd like to talk about is A Town Like Alice by Neville Shute, and I buddy read this with some ladies on BookTube, and I had such a great time discussing the book with each of them. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was so powerful and impactful, and the story just kept me so gripped. So the first 2/3 of the book were like 5-star material for me, but the last third, it wasn't like terrible or boring by any means, but it just wasn't as interesting to me, and I feel like it started off on such a high for me, and then it kind of just, you know, it's like the story became more peaceful, but I kind of enjoyed the like higher stakes at the beginning of the book, if that makes any sense. Anyways, so this book is about a woman named Jean, and she is recounting her time spent in Malaysia during World War II, and she is sharing the story with her lawyer, who is in charge of this money that she is going to inherit at the age of 35. So she's too young to inherit just yet, but she's sharing her story with this lawyer, and he is actually the narrator of this book. So it's a very interesting way that the author told this story. So anyways, Jean is sharing her story of her time in Malaysia, and basically during World War II, the Japanese had like taken over Malaysia, and all the men were taken to POW camps, and the women and children were separated. And so in this story, Jean is part of a group with a bunch of women and children, and they are forced to walk hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers throughout Malaysia, and it's one of the most harrowing books I've ever read. Just so much tragedy. There's just so much tragedy and heartbreak, and these women have endured so much. Like, just imagine walking for hundreds of kilometers, like no amenities, not enough food, there's dysentery, all these things that are literally threatening these women's lives, like wildlife, intense humidity, mosquitoes carrying the malaria. Like, it was just brutal. It was so emotional, and Jean is one of the strongest women, one of the strongest protagonists I have ever read in a book. She is so inspiring. Her strength and her determination to just keep going. Like, she really kept this group together. She really kept them encouraged when, you know, all hope was lost. And she just had so much compassion also for the different people in Malaysia, the different villages they would stop at. She was just so full of kindness, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful story. After a few chapters, we meet a man named Joe, and he is an Australian who ends up also in Malaysia, and he and Joe meet, and he ends up stealing some food for them and is brutally punished for it. And I'm not going to say anything else about the story because I don't want to spoil anything, but it was just, oh, so sad. The story just portrays human strength and perseverance so beautifully, and it has a beautiful touch of romance, and it was so impactful. 4 stars. Really, really good to read in the summer as well, because you just, like, you feel the heat in Malaysia. It also takes place partly in Australia, so it's hot all throughout this book, and you feel that. It's a really, really good summer read as well. All right, so those are the books I read from June 11th to 20th. I do apologize if I was a bit long-winded with some of my descriptions. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening to me blabber. If you guys have reached the end of this video, please leave a sun emoji in the comments below. Out of all these books, let me know if you've read any of them, and if you haven't read any of them, which one sounds the most interesting to you. I would love to know. So like I usually say, I appreciate each and every one of you guys for taking time out of your day to watch my videos, to watch me ramble, and it means the world. Thank you guys so much, and I hope to see you all in my next video. Bye.